What little known but obvious fact would make us all feel uncomfortable? Story 1. A caterpillar doesn't just grow wings on its wiggly body. Inside its cocoon, it breaks down into a gooey substance, keeping only a few key parts. From this goo, its body is rebuilt into a butterfly, complete with wings. Story 2. Roller coasters are built to shake. I've seen so many people decide to not get on because of the sway. But it's important. If the support beams and tracks didn't shake, they'd simply snap with all the force from the coaster cars roaring over them. Story 3. Words that are spelled the same but pronounced with emphasis on different syllables is actually indicative of the part of speech it is. Stress on the first syllable is a noun. Stress on the last syllable is a verb. Examples: contract and contract. The former is a noun, sign this contract, whereas the latter is a verb, the muscles contract. Same with record, address, impact, object, and a few others. Story 4. The term bug in computing has been around a long time. The term was not commonly used until an actual bug landed on an electrical switch, causing the computer to malfunction, returning a 0 when it was supposed to be a 1. The term bug grew in popularity afterwards and landed us where we are today. When we find a bug in software, we apply a patch. This comes from old Cardex punch card systems. If a punch card was punched in the wrong spot, you could fix it by applying a patch to the hole. Story 5. Plumbing comes from the root Latin word of plumbum, which means lead, and is the reason it's PB on the periodic table, because the Romans made water pipes out of lead. As an aside, they knew it was a problem for brains, but they just didn't care as it mostly affected the pores. Story 6. Copy-paste is from using typewriters, and people would cover a typo with a little pasted square of paper with the correct word. CC in email stands for carbon copy, which was when a piece of mail had to be seen by multiple recipients, usually in business. You would create carbon copy prints of your mail and send them to everyone plus the primary recipient. We took all the lingo from old communication and just added it to digital communication. Story 7. You cannot shock a person who has flatlined, asystole, heart rhythm back to life as seen on TV. Only effective treatments are chest compressions, epinephrine given intravenously, and luck, which results in about 2% survival rate. Most of the time, flatline occurs about 30 minutes after someone has died, as chaotic, unorganized hearth rhythms with electrical activity still occur, and only some are shockable or using pacing method with a defibrillator. Bonus: no, you can't cut a wire from something plugged into a wall like a lamp and shock someone back to life either. Story 8. When you deploy your parachute while skydiving, you do not get pulled back up in altitude. Most modern-day sport parachutes take anywhere from 600 to 1,000 feet to fully open. This is a common misconception due to media where the perspective is from someone who remains in free fall after their subject has deployed their parachute. Also, when you initially jump out of a plane, you do not get the stomach drop sensation that you do on roller coasters. Due to the plane's speed upon exiting, the sensation is closer to that of sticking your arm out of your car window on the highway. It's a feeling of pressure and feels more like what you'd imagine human flight to feel like if we were capable of it. Finally, many people say that they could never skydive due to a fear of heights. But as crazy as it may sound, that fear is very common among skydivers. Due to the height at which we jump from, your perspective of heights completely changes, and the ground rush effect doesn't happen until you are lower to the ground than you are when deploying your parachute at the proper recommended altitude. Edit. Spelling grammar. Story 9. Whether a or an comes before words starting with an H is frequently mistaught. It follows the same pattern as other words, using a for consonant sounds and an for vowel sounds. The special rules about H come from misapplying those rules to different accents. So Americans who pronounce the H in hospital but not in herb say a hospital in herb, a hospital in herb. But British people who pronounce the H in herb but not in hospital say an hospital a herb, an hospital a herb. Both are correct. Edit. Not all British. Story 10. Not sure about the obvious part, but asteroids in the asteroid belt aren't all hanging out closely as is shown in practically every sci-fi movie. There's a lot of asteroids, but space is gigantically empty. The average distance between asteroids is 600,000 miles, and when they cross orbits, they cross at high speeds. In the same style, if you are close to a nebula, it won't look like a dense cloud. You wouldn't even realize you are inside a nebula again. Space is gigantically empty. Story 11. A lot of what constitutes Christianity's views on things like Satan, angels, hell, etc. came centuries after the Bible was compiled from things like art and poetry. Examples. In the Bible, Satan is never described as an angel or as having been once pure and then falling. He's never a ruler of hell, though hell was prepared for him as punishment, nor is he ever called or equated with Lucifer, which was a name used to mock a human king. Satan is said to have angels of his own that did rebel, though these are never described as demons, which seem to be non-corporeal creatures who must possess in order to have a body, unlike angels, which angels are never described as having wings, and those creatures that are described with wings, cherubim, seraphim, are never called angels. Indeed, every instance in the Bible where an angel is called an angel, there's nothing differentiating them from the appearance of human men. Cherubim are described as fearsome warriors, not cute little baby Cupid things. Story 12. To remove ice from a tray, just hold both short ends and twist to loosen ice. I thought this was quite obvious until I caught my mother and brother on 2 separate occasions trying to remove ice with a knife. They thought I was a genius when I showed them how to do it properly. Story 13. The little triangle beside the image of the gas pump on your car's dash points toward the side your gas door is on. Super handy for rentals and borrowed cars or new ones. We have 2 vehicles and the gas door is on opposite sides, so I always check that. I didn't know that till I was in my 30s, haha. Story 14. Minutes as a measure of time came out of the need to measure smaller periods of time than 1 hour. Minute itself comes from minute, as in small, diminuto in Spanish. Then there was a need to measure even smaller increments of time. They divided the minute into 60 equal second minutes or seconds for short. Story 15. All your experiences are happening in your brain, and your brain lives in your skull. You feel like you're outside in the world, but in reality your brain has always been locked away in darkness. The thing with which we experience the world has never experienced the world. Arguably, you have never touched the real world. We are all brains in jars. Story 16. Earth is the only known location in the universe that supports fire at the surface. Oxygen is highly chemically reactive, and only the abundant life in Earth provides and maintains levels of free oxygen atoms eager to get violently hot with a good portion of the table of elements. Story 17. In sailing time, to determine your speed, you would throw a log of the back of the boat attached to a knotted rope. You would determine your speed as to how many knots you were going. This speed was tracked in the logbook, or log, and became the term for any written record, like a blog or vlog. Story 18. The prefix pre is unnecessary and superfluous in almost every use, maybe only with the exception of prefix. Anything you preheat, preview, pre-record, etc., you're just heating, viewing, recording, etc. Even prepare is just pairing in advance. Story 19. This one broke my heart a little bit. All those amazing, bright, colorful photos of space mostly only look like that because the photos were altered. The colors are added to represent different spectrums of light, etc., that we can't see with the naked eye. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basic gist of it. Story 20. The only reason we associate diamonds with engagements is because of marketing. De Beers was sitting on a pile of diamonds in the early part of the 20th century and couldn't figure out how to get rid of them. So they invented the idea that proposing marriage had to involve a diamond ring. Story 21. The World Wide Web and the Internet are 2 different things. The WWW made navigating the Internet easier. It's also from 1993, not 2000. The amount of times people say, we didn't have the Internet in the 90s boggles my mind. Especially when they then mention using things that were the Internet in the 90s. There's a reason that we had so many movies about the Internet and hacking in the 90s. Saying we as a collective society didn't have the Internet in the 90s because the person speaking only barely used it is like saying, we didn't have smartphones until 2015 inches because the person speaking didn't get one until then. Story 22. After birth, you will still look pregnant for months. The uterus takes at least 6 weeks to deflate down close to its pre-pregnancy size, over time going from the size of about a watermelon to an orange. I'm always shocked that in movies, TV shows, etc., the mom has a baby and then immediately goes to a flat stomach right after leaving the hospital. Story 23. The wings of the morpho butterfly aren't actually blue. They have microscopic structures that reflect only the blue wavelengths of light. Lexus used this principle to create structural blue paint for 300 special versions of their LC car. It has no blue pigment. It's all because of how the crystals in the paint reflect light. Story 24. The saying raining cats and dogs is over 500 years old, from when we lived in mud houses with thatch roofs and the local cats and dogs would live up in the thatch roofs for protection against the elements. So when it rained really hard, the kittens and pups would fall from ceiling. Thus, it's raining cats and dogs. Story 25. Those garbage trucks you see picking up both bins, landfill and recycling, are actually split trucks. There are 2 compartments inside, and the driver switches between the 2 from the truck cabin. All your recycling is not going to landfill. The recycling is taken to the recycling depot, and the remaining garbage goes to landfill. Story 26. So, for non-Americans, like myself, apparently it's not common knowledge, at least to my Australian friends, that Alaska isn't a part of Canada and is actually the USA. My coworker is planning a trip to Canada and Alaska, but didn't know that Alaska is actually the US. When she told me this, I thought she was kidding. I knew that. She asked some other coworkers, and most didn't know, even one who was also going to Canada in a few years. He thought Alaska was Canada. Story 27. Scientists have discovered almost everything, but we still don't know why everything happened. We know how it happened, but not why. Like, why do those things do that? Oh, it's because of how they are structured. But why are they structured like that? We will never know everything. We probably know the bare minimum, and I'm fine with that. Story 28. You don't feel temperature. What you feel is heat transfer. Feeling of cold is body heat leaving at a fast rate. Feeling hot is body heat not leaving quickly. This is apparent when you touch two objects that have been in the same room for a while, and therefore are both the same temperature. A metal object sucks heat out, so it feels cold. But wood at the same temperature doesn't feel hot or cold because not much heat is being transferred either way. Story 29. People are very easy to read if you know how to look for facial expressions. It's almost impossible to hide your true feelings because your face muscles always instantly react before you can tell them not to. It makes spotting lies a little too easy, which is also kind of a curse to an extent. Story 30. What are clouds actually made of? They're just gigantic ice cubes in the sky, 1 million pounds or more. It seems obvious, but if you don't really think about it, it's easy to not realize it. One of my kids asked me a few months ago, and I had to stop and think, I guess they're probably just ice and water. Looked it up, and sure enough, I was right. Story 31. When you swallow something, it's still on the outside of our body. Our bodies have a tube running through the middle of it, like a donut. Whatever we eat is contained in our stomach or GI tract, but it still needs to be absorbed to get into our bodies. Human donuts, basically. Story 32. One little known but obvious fact that might make many of us feel a bit foolish is that you don't actually see with your eyes, you see with your brain. Your eyes simply collect light and transmit information to your brain, which then interprets and creates the visual world around you. What you see is your brain's best guess of what's out there, based on the input from your eyes. This is why optical illusions work. They trick the brain, not the eyes. It's so obvious, yet many people don't realize the brain does the heavy lifting in vision. Story 33. Regardless of what you see on literally hundreds hospital dramas about using a defibrillator to shock someone back to life when they have flatlined, it actually is not used for that in the real world. It is used to help reestablish heart rhythms that are too fast/slow/irregular, but not to restart the heart. Story 34. Native English speakers know how to order adjectives without even knowing there's a correct order. Try changing around any of the following in the example from Wikipedia. One would say, 1, quantity, nice opinion, little, size, old, age, round shape, white color, brick, material, house. Story 35. Almost none of these make me feel stupid, and I think I'm not the only one. Like, why would anyone feel stupid for not knowing certain frogs are only poisonous because of what they eat? It's not like stuff like that is obvious in hindsight. It's just trivia you either know or don't. Story 36. It's easy to figure out what will happen in a movie, story, or book. All the details that develop characters, settings, or past events are put into the story to foreshadow everything that will happen. This is an editing technique to force out all the extraneous details and speed up the pace of the story. Story 37. Best I can do is a little-known fact that isn't obvious. KC-135 Stratotankers are mostly empty when they're flying with a full load of fuel. The fuel weighs so much that once the area below decks where the bags are usually stored, fuel tanks on a Stratotanker, is full, it can't handle any more weight. That's 206,000 pounds of JP-8, and the area that would usually be full of passengers is just an empty bay. The space can be used for cargo, but not with a full fuel load. Story 38. The distributive property of multiplication applies to the MEI subject-object dilemma many English speakers face. She told John and I about the sale. She told John and I about the sale. She told John, and she told I about the sale. When you say it this way, it's obviously wrong, and you have to replace she told I with she told me. Now factor it back out. She told John and she told me about the sale. She told John and me about the sale. She told John and me about the sale. Now you can't say you never use what you learned in math class. Story 39. The original quote is, "The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb," which essentially means the family you choose matters more than the one you don't. This is basically the exact opposite of when most people say blood is thicker than water to mean blood relatives are more important than others. Story 44. This one got me. Did you know that the division symbol is literally just a blank fraction with dots representing the numbers above and below? Oh well, when I first learned that, it blew my mind. It really helps to look at simple things differently. Sometimes the most obvious facts are the ones we overlook. Story 41 read this with Carl Sagan's voice. We are alive at what the vast majority of life in the whole universe will come to know as the very beginning of time. If you count the fact that a tiny star with its smaller gravity well and lower core pressures can last for as long as 10 trillion years, theory, the universe, at 14-point-something billion years, will need another 86 billion years to reach 1% of 10 trillion years. And that's just the ones that are alive now. There are constantly new stars born, and the vast majority are smaller and dimmer, and will last far, far longer than our own. Now that may make you feel extremely small and powerless. The effects we humans can have on the distant future could be unfathomably great. We could, as a civilization, send a repeating message that says, don't mass produce the following chemicals such as PFAs and other carcinogens to warn them to beware in their own societies the errors which brought about our downfall. We will almost certainly all perish, and our genetics may not last the 10+ trillion years, but an idea can last forever if you know how to send the message. The leverage we have to change the distant future is truly what may give life a universal meaning. Love you, fam. Story 42. A dog wagging its tail doesn't always mean that it's happy or friendly. They also wag their tails when they are frightened, reacting to a stimulus or nervous. Aggressive dogs will often wag their tails before biting. The amount of people who think wagging tails equals sign happy dog is astounding, even in vet med, the pet industry. Story 43, there's basically an infinite amount of different types of asphalt. Some are for cold or hot weather, some wick water away better, others are more flexible, etc. Basically, it's all much more different than you'd think by looking at it. It's also the most recycled product in the world. Roads your great-grandparents drove were recycled and remade into the same roads you drive today. Story 44. Apple and all the phone companies watch where you are at all times and sell that information. That's why when a civil war breaks out in America, I'm throwing my phone and car with stupid CarPlay out. And if I have to walk to the middle of nowhere, I will with my fucking compass, a map, and a Garmin, and living there off of deer and creek water. That's both been cured. I'm not insane. Story 45. When something burns, the object itself isn't actually on fire. When an object gets hot enough, it reaches its thermal capacity and starts to break down, releasing a gas, smoke. It is in fact the gas that is burning, which is why you can relight a candle very shortly after extinguishing it by holding a flame to the whisper of smoke. Look close enough and you'll see the flame travel down the smoke to the wick. Story 46. Maybe not little known, but the fact that Native Americans were called Indians for over 500 years because Christopher Columbus thought he had landed in India. I'm sure this is common knowledge to plenty of people, but it's not something we were taught in school. At least not where and when I grew up. They just said he was looking for spices. Story 47. Commonly accepted in the theater community that the spelling of theater refers to the place where it happens and theater refers to the actual art form. Not true. Just the difference in the way the French and Germans translated the Greek theatro. Story 48. Different types of door handles indicate generally how a door should be opened. A pull handle generally indicate that the door is pulled towards us when we enter. A level handle would be the option generally. It's something along those lines anyways. But when you have both, it can confuse a lot of people and have them struggling to open the door. It can be a little fun to watch. Story 49. If you ever start opening a bag of crisps and it tears at an awkward angle where going any further would send the crisps flying, stop. Use scissors to cut the rest of the bag or just hold the bag tightly to release the air and tear it carefully to avoid a crisplosion. You're welcome. Story 50. Illness symptoms like fevers and muscle aches are not directly called germs. Those symptoms actually come from your own immune system trying to rid your body of disease, whatever it is. Also, your skeleton is always wet until you die. Brushing your teeth is the only time you are cleaning your bones. There is a tremendous amount of data compression as light signals make their way through the front of our eye into and hit the retina, and then that information is sent to the visual processing center, meaning that none of us have actually perceived reality as it truly is. Enjoy knowing those things. Story 51. Earth is at the center of the universe. The speed of light dictates how much of the universe we can observe going back to the Big Bang, therefore proving its existence. Beyond that is darkness and unknown, and since we are looking out from one location, Earth, the observable universe is centered around it. Story 52. Lactate is good for your body and muscles, not bad. When your body produces lactate is the very moment you need to be at your best. People think we evolved to produce something that makes you worse. Also, lactate is acidic. The product that lactate is made from is the same acidity. Acidity won't damage your muscles. Story 53. A little known but obvious fact that might make us feel a bit foolish is that the letter Q is almost always followed by a U in English words. It's something we encounter every day, yet most of us don't consciously notice this pattern. Once you realize it, you'll start seeing it everywhere and wonder how you didn't pick up on it sooner. What's a red flag everyone should be aware of when attending a job interview? Story 54. If you have to make any financial investment into the company in order to work there. I interviewed for a window installation company and did well on the test. They wanted me in sales and said I needed to pay for a laptop. They would cover it and take it out of my checks if I didn't have the cash to pay up front. Story 55. If they tell you on arrival that the job you applied for is no longer available, but they have a very similar position that just opened up, leave immediately. It's a bait and switch tactic coupled with the sunk cost fallacy. The new position will be identical to the original one you applied for, except the salary is significantly lower. They're hoping that you'll play along because you showed up to be interviewed, probably desperate for work, and will accept any job, no matter the wage. Furthermore, the position you applied for doesn't really exist, or at least not at the advertised wage. Story 56. I interviewed with one of the big ticket networks. It's based in southern New England. The pre-screen call with the hiring manager went well, and our views about writing code, source control, and documentation were spot on, so I thought I'd give it a shot. When I arrived, they took my driver's license from me and told me they'd hold it while I was on site. Then they wanted to do a credit check while I was taking a series of grammar, basic intelligence, and JavaScript tests. I told them there's no way I was going to get my credit dinged with a hard credit check before an offer. The woman from HR just didn't get it. I made sure they stopped the credit check, collected my license, and walked out. I sat in the car for a minute thinking about the very odd vibe of the place, how they treated me, and wondered about the culture of a place that would do these things. Since then, they have been outed for a whole bunch of issues, including, big surprise, HR ethics. Looking back, I never should have considered working in that place. I'm very happy where I work now. My boss is smart and flexible, and I'm doing good work, as opposed to screwing concert goers. Near miss! Story 57. One I never see people mention that I absolutely should have paid attention to. Any implication that the role you're taking on is easy and or not that important. Either this or any signs they may be underestimating the amount of work involved. Seems like a no-brainer, but this gets let slip at interviews a shocking amount. Story 58. One time at the end of my interview, she asked if I had any questions, and I asked, "So how do you like working at X company?" And she said, "Well, I like the pay." I assumed the interview was probably recorded, so she couldn't say anything directly bad about her company, but was enough info for me that the culture is probably not all that good. Keep in mind, you are interviewing the company just as much as they are interviewing you. Make sure to come prepared to ask questions as well. You can find out some red flags through those. Story 59, I have two that are red flags. Had a guy one time ask me how old my children were. I think he was trying to suss out if I would be able to work all kinds of crazy hours. If they pry too much into your personal life, that's not good. Second, when most of the people you come in contact with haven't been there very long, like 3 years or less. That means lots of turnover. If it's new company or location, though, that wouldn't count. Story 60. When you ask, tell me about a time when one of your employees really impressed you, and they cannot give you a single example. My current job gave me multiple examples of how their team members impressed them. That's how I knew I wanted to work there. In comparison, when I asked this in another interview, the answer was, there's so many instances, and I can't focus on only one, which I interpreted as, I don't value my staff in the least. I was glad not to get that offer. Story 61. A big red flag is when the interviewer talks negatively about former employees or the person who previously held the position you're applying for. It can be a sign of a toxic work environment where blame shifting or poor management is the norm. If they're willing to badmouth others, it's likely they'll do the same to you down the road. Story 62. Being hired on the spot. I always thought it meant I was a great candidate, and if they didn't hire me on the spot, I bombed the interview. Looking back, they only hired me on the spot because they were desperate to find another person ASAP. Every job I've had where I was hired on the spot made it very clear why their turnover rate was so high. The ones I waited a bit for the job offer ended up being great places to work. Story 63. If you show up and it's not what you were told to expect, it's probably nonsense. My example is an interview I too went years ago. I'd had several phone interviews and seemed it was going well. They asked me if I could come in for an in-person. The first flag was something in the appointment email that made me look up the address, and it was a hotel conference center. I asked if this was an office or what. They admitted they were doing interviews in a conference room because they were doing a lot of high-G and had managers and HR flying in from around the country. I arrived at a giant conference hall with hundreds of applicants for the position I interviewed for. We checked in, got numbers, and waited, then sat through several rounds of group interviews with panels of interviewers. I talked to a few people while we waited and found out we'd all been told it was another round of interviews for people that had good prospects for getting hired. It was not. It was a circus. A guy I talked to on the way out was near tears. He'd taken an unpaid day off and borrowed a car to drive there. He told his wife he was coming home with a great job. The whole thing was degrading and insulting. Story 64. No matter the position, even entry level, if you're an external candidate, ask them this. If your decision comes down to an internal hire versus an external hire, what would make one stand out over the other? If they say everyone gets asked the same question so it's an even playing field or something like that, you just found out there are internal candidates, and external candidates are only there to statistically even it out. The job will very likely go to the internal candidate. Works nearly every time. Story 65. In my experience, every manager that told me they weren't a micromanager was a micromanager. I've learned to dig deeper when people say this to figure out what they consider micromanagement. For example, asking them how they personally stay up to date on what their team is working on. One guy that said he wasn't a micromanager actually had a system of tracking that involved his reports to update tickets, fill out forms, and submit an email status update every week. Just because someone automated their micromanagement doesn't make them not a micromanager. Story 66. Interviewers are late a bunch of times or forget interview and need to reschedule. If they prioritize commitments or things constantly come up last minute that push back a scheduled interview, I think it shows the company either doesn't have its shit together or everything will be putting out fires last minute once you are hired. Story 67. It's a big red flag if they start referring to how we're like a family in a way that implies you'll be expected to give up your personal time and limits. Usually, it means that we'll guilt trip you for taking breaks and expect you to work extra hours for no extra pay. Pay attention to how they discuss work-life balance. Story 68. I asked if the promotion ladder could be clearly defined / laid out and what systems they had in place to develop existing talent. I was in the interview at a personal request due to a lack of experience in the department. I obviously struck a nerve. After a closed-door chat, management was adamant that this was a performance-based company and promotions were applied accordingly. They were apparently not hard up enough for experience. I was not invited to join the team. If a company cannot detail employee retention and development outside of money, I personally don't want to work there. Strangely, they were touting their new pet insurance benefit as a big selling point. This was an aerospace company and not a small one. Story 69. I haven't seen this one yet. When your interviewer stops the interview to take a phone call or talk to someone else about some kind of work thing that could obviously wait, whether it's understaffed, management isn't organized, or some kind of a sick test every job I've ever had this turned into a shit show. Personal work emergencies aside, they're asking whether they can disrespect you and you'll take it. Story 70. When they tell you that a role you'll be working closely with are really passionate about what they do, before asking how you deal with a difficult person, and then having that question asked again by someone different in another round of interviewing. I get it. You're telling me that I'll be working with a rude, entitled asshole if I'm hired. Story 71. If you can't find the job title role you're applying for listed with any current past employees, like checking Glassdoor, and you don't see any reviews from anyone with the role, companies will change the name of a role to make it harder to compare salaries across external websites. Always a red flag if you notice this, and if they balk when you ask if the current role you're applying for has been previously referred to as another title. Story 72. In the final interview with the big bosses, they joked about all the people that had been fired, downsized, let go, pushed out, etc. by the company over the years. Not surprisingly, and not so many years later, all of those big bosses had themselves been fired, downsized, let go, pushed out. Really dodged a bullet there. Story 73. I was a senior-level 20-plus year experience, licensed architect in a large firm, exploring some other well-known firms. At a second or third meeting with design leaders, the two principals in the room started arguing with each other about the design direction of the firm. A job interview had just become a comedy routine. My contact later called to apologize, and I wished them good luck. Story 74. I had one boss talking with his business partner shortly after I was hired about the time he closed a previous business rather than negotiate with the carpenters union. It was just after the pandemic started, so work was work, but it contributed to my decision to leave rather than renegotiate my pay rate. as did requiring me to work remotely while sick and while my partner was in the ICU. Story 75, Bait and Switch. I had an IT support interview after 7 wires experience with IBM, and the group interviewing me had agreed I was perfect for their needs when one of them looked at previous work I had done for 5 years, a technical writer. Suddenly they realized they were also looking for a tech writer to document their entire work process for ISO 9000, and the IT job suddenly was pulled back unless one wrote their ISO documentation first, over a year's work, without any help. I had hated writing tech documents and had gone back to school to get into IT in my mid-40s. They pulled the IT job offer to me. Story 76. I got an interview for a front desk position at a small law firm, basically doing administrative work, like scheduling and handling paperwork. Anyway, I get a text, not a call, from them, asking what time I would be available for an interview. I responded with my availability, pretty much any time of day during the week. Then they mentioned that the interview was going to be over Zoom. I currently don't have any camera or quality microphone to do a digital interview, and since their only office was a 20-minute drive, I asked if we could simply do the interview in person, as I was currently unable to conduct a digital interview. Radio silence for about 5 hours, followed by a text basically ignoring what I had said and saying the Zoom interview would be at this time. Once again, I responded, reminding them I was unable to do Zoom, but could easily do an in-person interview or one over the phone. The next day, I got a response saying that as I was unable to conduct an interview, my application would be dropped. This was about 2 months ago, and the job listing is still posted. So I guess them being wildly uncompromising on something as simple as an interview. Story 77. They misread overlapping positions as a working gap and tried to, insinuate that I had been in prison or something. It was weird. Everyone working there was really young except the owner, which read like rapid turnover. The first thing I always do is go scout them on LinkedIn, then see how long their people have been there. Good people with good track records that have stayed. That is my green flag. Story 78. I was very motivated to leave a hostile work environment and switch to another agency. After being offered a new job at a new agency, the interviewer, my potential future boss, said she needed me to start at a date in about 1.5 weeks. I told her that I needed at least 2 weeks due to turnover at my agency. They didn't deserve it, but I didn't want problems leaving. My potential boss then said, if you want to work here, you'll start in $1.5 weeks. I told them I didn't want to work there, but I appreciated them trying to bring me on board. Oddly enough, I now work at that agency, albeit a different division, and I'm technically higher up the chain than the person who offered me the job, although we've never spoken or run into each other since I've worked there. Story 79. If the entire interview is them trying to sell you on the role, usually a bad sign. I've worked in staffing for a while, and even high-level interviews with top people in their field are more a conversation, having the candidate run through their experiences. Now, if they try to sell the role company, it's not a terrible thing. I'm talking if they barely talk about you at all. Now, that is a bad sign. Story 80. When they Freudian slip that they offer health insurance for one group of their employees, but not another group. Regardless of the size of the business, if they do not have someone operating in an HR role or capacity, when they bring another employee into your interview as opposed to a manager or HR rep, if that same random employee in your interview texts you between interviews to say, X says if you accept the offer, you'll definitely get your own office. Hope that helps your decision. Companies that encourage you to download remote software to your personal computer as opposed to providing a company computer with software already installed. Bonus points. If they tell you during the interview that remote work is acceptable, then you later watch someone get fired for working remotely while they are mending a debilitating injury. Just know, you fucked up and are next on the chopping block. Story 81, I guess this is useful if you're getting into cram school teaching. I had a job interview a few months ago for an ESL position where they asked about my preferred style of teaching. I answered with something along the lines of incorporating different styles of learning to suit all students while covering the 4 key language skills, creating a supportive environment in which students are allowed to make mistakes as participation is more important than perfection. Be patient with the kids as this is their third language, etc. The interviewer told me I was 100% wrong, and I just needed to ensure the students had top grades to take home to their parents. Nothing else matters. She also added that she wanted someone she could shape into a real school name teacher. That is, does whatever the school says without question. Oh, and she insulted my ability to speak their native language despite it being banned in their school as they wanted to advertise an English-only environment. Red flags everywhere. Was offered the job. Politely declined. Edit. Another fun thing. They asked to see proof of my residency and were confused that my card had no expiration date. I had to explain that after 5 years of living in this country, foreign workers can apply for a permanent residency card rather than reapplying for a work permit every year. The woman interviewing me called in others to look at my card, and none of them had ever heard of it. This means that no teacher had ever lasted at that school for 5 years. I wonder why. Story 82. From the other side of the fence, when attending an interview as the interviewer, I'm always weary of candidates who don't ask me questions and are simply passively answering questions instead of being engaged. I'm not asking for you to be pumped and sing the company's praises, but if you're not engaged in the interview, I get the feeling you're just going through the motions to get any job, not this job. And I don't really want to hire you because you may just leave too soon to get an ROI. Look, I get it. You want this job because you have bills to pay. That's why I do my job too. But why do you want this job at this company versus one somewhere else? Show me you're not just a drone blasting out resumes, but that you actually considered the specifics of this position at this company. Again, you don't have to suck the company's dick and pretend you've always been super passionate about us, what we do, but show a genuine interest in finding the right job for you. Interviews are a two-way street. As much as we are interviewing you, you should be interviewing us. Some really good questions I love hearing from prospective employees. What is the most positive and the most challenging or frustrating aspect of working at? I love this one, and I answer honestly, not with some HR bullshit. This tells me you're serious about potentially working here but want to know the bad with the good so you can make an informed decision. Are there any technologies or practices used that I should look into for my own professional development? While some information is proprietary, I'm happy to tell you some basic stuff, and it shows you're interested in learning more and about preparing for a new role, even if you don't get it. Why was the position made available? If it was an existing position, can you tell me any details of why the previous person left? Or if it is a new position, can you share why it was created and approved? This is a very valid question. Now, I may not be able to answer that fully. Like if the previous person was terminated, I may only be able to say the previous holder separated from the company and the position became available. But I enjoy sharing when we were able to promote someone, or if they got headhunted by a better offer we couldn't match, or if it's a new position because we're growing and need more staff or are branching into a new technology. It again shows you're invested in the position and want the full details to make an informed decision. Story 83. Heed this warning. I worked for a specialty chain that was run by one man. He did things in a very unique way and bundled his divisive beliefs with free items at the most challenging times. Many employees left and posted on Glassdoor. The company flew all of the store managers to headquarters, where the head of HR showed us Glassdoor posts about the company. The man smarmily told us this was a safe place, and we were free to speak openly without repercussions. Those that did seemed to be gone for all sorts of reasons within the next year. If a company shows you their underbelly during the interview, why would you think it will get better? Story 84. If they focus excessively on how passionate you need to be about the job or the company, it could mean they're looking to exploit your enthusiasm rather than offering a fair work-life balance or the classic "we're like family" line. While a close-knit culture can be positive, if they insist too much on how everyone is like family, it might suggest boundaries are blurred and personal life might intrude on work. Story 85. You are meeting with someone reading your resume and asking questions about it as if they didn't look at you beforehand and are not just asking you about you. Any company worth your time wants to know more than the flat version of you that gave them a green light AI scan on the job description. Story 86. During the interview, the GM came into the office to complain to the interviewer about a customer and said, "Times like this, I really wish I had gun to shoot a motherfucker." Then he looked at me and said, "Who is this?" So I introduced myself and he just walked out of the room. I actually stopped the interview after that, apologized, and just explained that I couldn't work for someone like that. Story 87. I once had an interview where I asked whether the job was fixed working hours or flexible, and the person said I shouldn't be asking that kind of thing in a first interview. He implied I was being arrogant and that I was acting as if I had got the job already. I was like, no, it's just useful information for me to have. I think that's a specific example of a more general red flag, the interviewers treating the interview only as an exercise in which you sell yourself to them and not the other way around. Story 88. If they don't want to directly answer questions about wages, overtime expectations, or any of your questions prying into daily life there and how well the employees like working there, run. If you ask whether there will be situations where you have to cover someone else's shift after asking for that day off and getting approved, and they allude to that exact scenario ever happening before, run. If you ask how much they make, how much the boss makes, how long they've had their positions, how often someone gets to move up the ladder and they get uncomfortable or beat around the bush, run. If you ask about the other employees' wages and they say, we don't allow employees to share their wages with each other or something to those vibes, run. Basically, take all the crappy situations that happen at work. Ask them about it, and if they squirm, run. Story 89, that they're really, really happy to see you and get you onboarded. Hello, fresh new blood whose only drive is aiming to please and doing all the work and looking good and getting references. I learned one too many times that managers that were all too happy to interview me were probably running really shifty ships. I had one job do that where we lost 11 people in 5 months. 2 quit on the same day. And this goes hand in hand too, high turnover. I had another job where in my 4 years there, we lost an average of 1 person a month. The worst week saw 5 people leave and get fired.